In this video, I'm going to go through the exact framework journalists use to decide if your story is newsworthy or not. I'm also going to show you some great examples of how you can turn a boring story into one that gets featured on the likes of The Guardian, NBC, and Sky News. Hey guys, I'm Veronica and welcome to the JournoFinder channel. I'm the co-founder of JournoFinder and I've got coverage in pretty much every publication you can think of, including CNN, New York Times, CBS, and even an interview on Fox News. In the world of digital PR, knowing what makes an idea newsworthy isn't just a nice to have. It can be the difference between wasting days on an idea that gets ignored or landing a headline-making story. I've helped hundreds of people on their PR journeys, and the biggest mistake I see with ideation: people focus on themselves and what they think is interesting. But here's the thing, journalists don't care about you, they care about their audience. If you want your ideas to stand out, you need to think like a journalist. That's where the 6 secrets of newsworthiness come in. This is the framework I mentioned earlier, and journalists use it to decide which stories make it to print. Once you understand this framework, you'll be able to instantly spot a winning idea and which ones need some extra work. Also, don't worry, you don't have to tick every box. If your story just hits 2 or 3 of the markers, you've still got a great chance at grabbing some coverage. Okay, now I'm going to break down each of these values with real-world examples and throw in some extra tips on there on things like pitching. Let's kick things off with timeliness. Ask yourself, why am I telling this story today? Consider this. Is it a good idea to pitch a golf-related story in November? A quick Google Trends search shows us that interest in golf is at its lowest point in November. Another way to put this is that golf is a low-currency topic in November. People just aren't thinking about golf. Want to get your golf client coverage in the winter? You need to tie golf in with a high-currency topic. With Christmas just around the corner, you could do a story on something like golf tops the list of the most expensive hobbies to shop for this Christmas. There, you've taken your low-currency topic of golf and you've tied it with a high-currency topic of Christmas, which makes it more newsworthy. Next up, we have impact. This is how your story affects other people's lives. The bigger the impact and the more people your story affects, the more attention your pitch will grab. Here's an example. Freedom of Information request reveals hospital recycles 40% of its waste. This figure might be interesting to some people, but it doesn't really impact anyone. It's not that newsworthy. Next, think about Freedom of Information request reveals there are 50% less police in the UK. This directly affects your audience in terms of how safe they feel on the streets. Now for one of the pitching tips I promised. The impact your story is going to have makes a perfect hook for your pitch. In this example, you could start your police pitch with alarming new data reveals police numbers in the UK have plummeted by 50%, leaving communities vulnerable to rising crime and slower emergency responses. See how I've made it super clear what impact this story is going to have on the readers? This will make this story irresistible to the journalists. The third value, proximity, is closely tied with impact. Proximity means the closer an event is to your audience, the more relevant and impactful it becomes. You could have a hugely impactful story, but if you pitch it to a journalist whose audience isn't going to be impacted, it won't land. Take the police example from before. This story might be a big deal for readers in the UK, but pitching it to an Irish outlet isn't going to work because it doesn't affect the Irish community. Proximity isn't just about geography either. You also need to consider niche. A journalist who writes for a real estate magazine isn't going to be interested in your pitch on the benefits of face yoga. By the way, if building media lists is something you struggle with, I have a great in-depth video on just that topic which I've linked here and in the description below. The fourth value is another P, prominence. Prominence means the bigger the name, the bigger the news. Does your story involve a celebrity or an influential brand? Readers love reading about people in the public eye. If you can create a story involving a trending celebrity, i.e. a high currency topic, you've hit the news jackpot. Here's a great example, which also has a quick lesson about relevancy in it. A company that provides B2B training wanted to get some coverage for their brand. The problem here is that B2B training really isn't a newsworthy topic. It doesn't impact that many people, and it's kind of boring. Instead, they pushed a story to the press that Elon Musk was on track to be the world's first trillionaire. It went viral. It was everywhere. Why? Because everyone loves to hate Elon Musk. He's also a really high currency topic because he's in the news all the time. You might be thinking here, but what about relevancy? How does the fact that Elon Musk is going to become a trillionaire relevant to a company that does B2B training? Well, in the pitch, as well as talking about individuals who are on track to become trillionaires, they also spoke about trillion-dollar companies and then tied the success of these trillion-dollar companies to the fact that they had strong learning and development programs. A perfect tie-in. I thought it was genius. Okay, now let's move on to the fifth newsworthy value, bizarre or novel. If your idea is something that's been seen by journalists and readers over and over again, it's not going to excite them. Think most popular baby names by a state. This is something that's done pretty much every year, maybe even several times a year, which means journalists have seen it so many times and it's boring to them. But if you have something they won't have seen before, bingo. A great example is this McCheapest map, created by me and JournoFinder's other founder, Sasha. McCheapest is a map of Big Mac prices by state. There had been other maps done before on fast food prices by state, but no one had made an interactive map or included prices from every single McDonald's across the US. This was a brand new idea, and the interactiveness gave it a real novel factor. This map was published years ago, but even now it's still collecting links. We also sometimes get emails asking if we could please update the data. The sixth factor is human interest. Human interest just means that humans like to hear about other humans. Stories that tug at the heartstrings or talk about personal struggles with positive outcomes will always get clicks, which is exactly what the journalist wants. This is the perfect value to tap into if you're trying to build a personal brand. Think, I quit my 60-hour job to travel the world. Here's how I afford it. I didn't use social media for a year. This is how my life changed. How a single mum startup landed up in Forbes. If you've got an interesting story or someone in your company has an interesting story, tell it. Some big names in SEO have done it. I've seen Craig Campbell in The Sun, and I've seen Joe Davies tell his story of how he went from working at McDonald's to running a $10 million business. Pretty much anyone that runs a business should be able to tell their rags to riches story. And this is something that humans love to read because it gives them hope that they can do the same thing. Last up, the seventh news value I'm going to talk about is conflict. Conflict is where your story involves some sort of disagreement, struggle, or clash between different parties. You won't see this value used as much as the other ones in the PR world because brands, rightly, are cautious about being associated with negative stories. But I'll still give you some brief examples. First up, your story could showcase a conflict between people or businesses. An example of this kind of story is when a small bakery would get thousands of orders cancelled by a big name brand. This kind of story also has the value of prominence because of the big name brand. Another example is your story could highlight some conflicting data, such as study reveals 70% of eco-friendly packaged goods aren't actually eco-friendly. But again, if you're a beginner in the PR world, I would probably recommend not looking into conflict just because it can sometimes turn into negative press. Okay, now you understand those 7 elements that make a story newsworthy. Next time you're thinking of an idea, run it through the framework. Ask yourself, which of these values does my story hit? And how can I emphasize that value in the pitch to make it super obvious to the journalist why my story is newsworthy? And remember, your story doesn't need to hit all of the 7 elements to succeed. By simply incorporating 1 or 2 of them, you'll have a much better chance at landing your next campaign. If you want to get more press coverage, subscribe so you don't miss out on our future videos. And if you're struggling to make a media list, click here to watch this video.